welcome. I'm Billy Riggs. I am the faculty member and professor at the University of San Francisco and lead our autonomous vehicles initiative. And it is so exciting this morning to have a coffee talk here with Pierre Maillot from HEEX. And HEEX Technologies is one of the kind of most exciting companies I have had the opportunity of interacting with right now in the autonomous driving and innovation sector. And so we could not be more proud to have a conversation with him this morning, all the way from Paris. And so without further ado, I look forward to getting started and wanted to pitch it to Pierre this morning and this afternoon, his time, to
Yes.
Maybe a quick introduction of himself, and then I think we have our agenda today is really, Pierre's going to talk a little bit about his company and what he's doing. He has a little presentation, then we'll have a conversation, and in terms of dialogue, if you have questions this morning, feel free to put those in the chat. And I'll facilitate and try to, Pierre and I will try to dialogue those after Pierre talks a little bit about what he's doing these days. So Pierre.
Thank you, Billy. Well, good evening, good morning to everyone. I'm very happy to be here, and I'd like to thank you again, Billy, and the University of San Francisco School of Management to give me the opportunity to exchange on this very exciting topic about autonomous vehicle and cities. A little bit about myself before we start. I've been working in a much bigger corporate. I was working for Bosch for 15 years in the first very automotive driven role. So my customers were car makers in Europe, in Asia. And then Bosch is a big company, very present in automotive, but different sectors. So we also worked on different business areas, specifically smart cities. And there are a lot of applications with smart cities. One of our very iconic project is a cooperation that we have with a private developer in San Francisco. And I actually spent the last 5 years of my life in San Francisco, where I had the opportunity to meet Billy. And I acted as a senior technological advisor for this private developer, thinking about technology in the design phase to improve the way we are living. So obviously, mobility was a big topic, to make this community more accessible, also more sustainable, autonomous driving being one of the application that was in discussion, but also speaking about building, ecological aspect, security, smart grid, and so forth. So very exciting project at Hunters Point Shipyard in Candlestick that you may know, which still is in progress, I would say. But no, it was a very exciting time. And I moved to HEEX Technologies when I was returning back to France. I met the founders, and I was very convinced with their vision, the technology, and the market that we are addressing. So again, very happy to be here and to tell you a little bit more about what we are doing.
Yeah. So and for those that that there's a whole development that you were involved with in Hunters v. Bay Point with Lennar and many others that is just really exciting for the regeneration of San Francisco. So that is just it was exciting time to meet you in terms of you thinking about the way that Bosch could contribute to that. And it's really awesome that the seeds that you planted then are continuing to take root. And that you're now doing this thing with HEEX. So I think what we had planned is that maybe you would talk to us a little bit about what you are doing with HEEX and show us particularly how you're enabling and accelerating automation. And so if I think we planned maybe about a 20-minute presentation, and then folks, if you have questions, feel free to bring them through. We wanted this to for those of you on the US West Coast, this is your morning hour. So if you have questions and want to dialogue some stuff, we will try to fold those in as we can. And I think one of the things that both Pierre and I are very interested in is not just the way that automation will impact vehicles in terms of, you know, how we drive, but also how we live. And I think that's what Pierre is always focused on from, you know, from knowing him, is the way cities will change with automation, but the way other forms of transportation might change with automation. And I think that's Heeks is in this sweet spot where it's not just vehicles that they have opportunity to innovate. So maybe Pierre, if you want to take it away with a presentation, I think that would be a good place to start.
I think you still need to grant me the screen sharing rights.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, can everybody see the screen?
Yes, it looks great.
Okay, so before, you know, explaining what we do, I want to, you know, address a little bit the market and the challenges that we are working on. So as you have observed, now we have more and more industry that are embracing AI as an opportunity to improve their businesses. Autonomous system, you know, play a major role in, you know, providing more reliable, safer, sustainable solution in different kind of industry. So, you know, not only autonomous driving, but also in retail, in industry, in healthcare. You know, you have automated drones. So there is a big shift on the market thanks to AI and autonomy. We do currently focus our activity, our efforts now on autonomous driving. Nevertheless, the solution that I will introduce today has the potential to be, you know, replicated in different kind of industries, right? We are dealing with data, no matter where, you know, the data is being generated. But autonomous driving is today, let's say, our first focus. The reason is there is a big challenge now that the industry is facing in terms of accuracy. You know, if you, Billy, and me, you know, to feel comfortable to go in a car without a driver, you need to know that this car is like really, really safe and really accurate. And the current level of accuracy of the industry is not good enough. You still have issues that are sometimes hitting the news, hopefully not fatality, but sometimes it is. The thing is that in order to deploy commercial application for, you know, autonomous driving, you need to reach a level of accuracy which goes even above what human will accept for their own driving behavior. And that makes, let's say, the level of development and the level of autonomy extremely high. And to go there, there is still a very long way. The other reason is that there is a very high stakes. There are a lot of companies who invested billions of dollars in the industry with promises that we will see autonomous driving by 2020. We are still far from there. There are still like unclear, you know, vision and target when we will see like, you know, autonomous car everywhere, providing different kind of service. So obviously, a strong need from this industry to accelerate their time to market and deploy their applications. And last but not least, it's also very good timing. There is a lot of consolidation in the market with, you know, companies, you know, merging, acquisition. So this consolidation is also a great opportunity for, you know, enabling new technologies and to continue the acceleration of the market. And the limitation that, you know, most of companies are now facing is the limitation of big data. As you know, when you are working on AI algorithm, you need to feed them with a lot of data. This data ingestion at the beginning will significantly improve your level of autonomy because every data will provide new learning and then you will make a lot of progress. But the thing is that the more data you provide your algorithm, the more difficult it becomes to continue the progression. And the thing is that you arrive at a kind of like plateau where you collect a lot of data, but actually only a very small percentage of this data is becoming relevant to continue your development. And that is a big issue that these companies are facing because they are now, you know, dealing with terabyte, petabyte, exabyte of data. and they are looking for the needle in the haystack, so to say. And the thing is that not only it's a situation that they face today, but because the former data management workflow that they have established for their organization worked so well for the beginning of the autonomy, they are not equipped today in terms of organization and tools with dealing with the challenge that they face now. And that's a big issue that we are basically addressing today. To give you a more concrete, let's say, perspective on that topic, today, an autonomous driving vehicle will be equipped with camera, LiDARs, radars, and they can basically generate up to 5 terabytes per hour per vehicle, just of data. Then when you think about transferring all this data, this collection to get more information on pedestrian or road intersection or traffic light, or why do I have a disengagement, meaning the driver has to take over the wheel, all this data that needs to be analyzed, it needs to be transferred. And it's so huge that some companies are even doing that manually and taking actually physical rack from the car and putting this on the server. And finally, there is the data processing, which is basically sorting out the garbage, so to say, the data that is not relevant from the actual relevant data that needs to be processed. And it can take like weeks to basically, again, find this needle in the haystack, as I said. So the development team that are at the end of the chain that are looking for new data for feeding their AI model, to work on debugging, to work on system validation, to do labeling, they are lacking of productivity and resources optimization, because the process of basically accessing this data is becoming very, very cumbersome. And the problem is that this struggle is so big now that every single company that we have been discussing to at different level of challenge are now looking for solutions. They are either looking at solution externally, companies like us. But the thing is that on the market today, you have like either legacy software, like end-to-end solution, which are a combination of many different software. But in this case, it's not very modular or interoperable with what you have already developed. So you will need to basically disrupt everything that you have done. And it's obviously not very practical in terms of implementation. Or you have also other solutions that are existing, but are more like application software. They will work only on one specific aspect of this data management workflow, such as data indexation or data curation, but they don't really address the issue holistically. The alternative would be to develop that tool internally. The problem is that, data management touch so many different stakeholders in the organization that it will become very difficult to basically meet everyone's expectation if you do that work or that process internally. Also, you develop something from a product approach, not a product-driven approach, so you miss all the scalability, the economy of scale of having like an actual product on it. And then also it's not sustainable from a cost and maintenance perspective. You definitely would have the competencies to do it, but it will not make sense economically to do that. And I know where I'm coming from. I know what I'm talking about. So the summary of that, let's say, first market assessment is that big data allowed great progress for autonomous driving. But the thing is that now with the level of autonomy that we've reached, and you've seen all these cars in San Francisco driving and so on, and they can drive for 99% of the situation, but that's not enough. And the thing is that when they can drive, that data is becoming irrelevant. And in order to reach a level of autonomy that will allow for commercial application, they don't need more data, they need better data sets. And that's what basically we are aiming to offer. We are currently developing a solution that is providing relevant data set for development and operation teams. Because this data is so valuable for the team, we basically qualify it as a smart data. The idea is to basically have a complementary layer, so we don't disrupt everything you have done. It's really something that can be like complementary to the existing workflow. But the idea is to really have a tool to plan, extract, distribute and process the relevant data that you need. So it's a bit like providing a gold pan to the gold digger, so to say, right? And to basically put your data management workflow on steroid so that you can accelerate your productivity and your R&D activity. And that follows a very simple process in 5 steps, where you have a first planning phase. You need to think through what kind of, let's say, challenges you have to continue to develop your autonomy system. So it could be getting more information for labeling. It could be working on debugging, on software validation. All these, let's say, aspects of like, thinking through the data that you need to continue to make your progress. From that point, we will be able to basically translate that into trigger algorithm that will be embedded in the vehicle, and we'll be monitoring all the different conditions of the vehicle. So we'll be able to, detect, get the information of the detection of the vehicle. We rely on the vehicle intelligence to do that. So it's really to improve your own intelligence. So that's why that's what we want to monitor. So assuming you want to detect an event where there is a pedestrian crossing with a green light, and that generates an emergency brake, these are conditions that we can put all together to extract that specific scenario for you. So our software will run in the vehicle. We're just going to be listening to what the car is actually observing. And when a scenario or an edge case is actually occurring, then this is when we're going to do the recording of that specific event to form the data set that you need. So that detection part can take place in the vehicle on the edge, or we can also do that in the cloud if our customers still want to process everything in the cloud. We still have the possibility to filter and provide with this intelligence from a cloud perspective. The third step is securing the data, making sure that obviously the data pipeline is going to the right place and being all secure. There is an option to certify it, because we believe the data would ultimately also be shared with third-party organizations and being potentially monetized. And then you have the processing of the data and then the distribution through our web platform. So these are the different steps. So it's not only purely a technological solution, it's also a different mindset in basically thinking through the extraction of the relevant scenario that you need, rather than collecting everything and then digging and mining into what you are actually looking for. So our solution is purely a software solution. It's a modular software solution. The idea is also to integrate seamlessly into the existing environment of our customer. We have, let's say, the embedded solution running in the cloud with our SDK and API that we will integrate into the customer architecture if they'd like to. And then we have our cloud-based solution with all the API processing all the data, and then a front-end web platform which provide all the functionalities and the web service on this data. We don't need any device to integrate our solution. We are fully agnostic in terms of software, hardware, and cloud, so we can also accommodate any kind of architecture based on our customer requirements. And the idea is to be the less intrusive as possible, so that really you can integrate your solution as a new data pipeline management for your activity. To give you an example of like project that we are working on, we just recently worked on a pilot project with Mercedes, NVIDIA, and Auster, with a LiDAR manufacturer. We equipped that beautiful vehicle that you see on the right, which is a Mercedes EQC, full electric SUV. And we let's say, retrofit the entire technology in that vehicle to illustrate the power of this smart data approach. The idea was to show driving across Paris, meeting some kind of like specific scenarios where people in Paris that are not as let's say educated at San Francisco, so they will just cross the street even if it's a red light for them. So that's the kind of situation that you need to learn, and we will talk about that, like how learning to drive in San Francisco for an autonomous car will be completely different from like having that car driving in Paris, because obviously the culture, the behavior, the codes are completely different. But the idea of that project was to show how we are able to extract these scenarios, these edge cases, thanks to our solution. And we have different applications for that. We obviously talk about autonomous driving, which is more like the L4, L5 level of automation, which will be more like event database for machine learning teams. But it could be also and we'll talk about that also later, that that could be applied for more like automated functionalities or software services such as ADAS L2, L3. And the idea is also to collect relevant data from all these software services that are in the vehicle in order to continuously improve the product for the tier one and the car manufacturers. So a great project. We'll be able to share more on LinkedIn, so don't hesitate to follow X Technologies account, because some cool videos are coming on that, where we're going to explain a little bit further what the product can do. To conclude that short introduction, just a few words about the teams. The three co-founders, Bruno, who has been a serial entrepreneur, who had his first company in mobility that he sold a few years ago. Etienne, who joined him at the beginning of the adventure two years ago, who was a background in investment and VC. And Arnaud, who has been heading the robotics laboratory in Paris for 20 years. So obviously a huge knowledge of robotics and autonomous driving application. We did some of the best acceleration program in the world, Plug and Play, back in 2020. We are actually just now ending the TechStars program that we conclude in Tel Aviv. So Bruno and Etienne are actually now in Tel Aviv as I speak. So Israel, for the one who don't know, is also a very, let's say, dynamic market on all these different autonomous driving, connected vehicle topics. And just recently, we also announced Google was investing in X Technologies, which has been a great achievement for us, a great milestone, because beside purely the investment that we received, it was also recognition from an iconic tech leader that our technology and our vision is actually legitimate. So it was an investment through the Black Founder Funds that I believe we will talk also a little bit further after. But yeah, that's where we are right now, and a very exciting coming months for us with more customer projects and fundraising to be announced.
That's a really awesome start to our discussion, Pierre. So thank you so much for starting. And we've got an amazing group of attendees, and I'm looking and I'm thinking about all the folks even on the line that I've talked about, the parallels. I'm so happy you talked about the all electric pilot you're doing with Mercedes, because we have folks on the line that have talked about the all electric commute for a long time now, and the idea of combining electrification and automation really holds a lot of promise. And it's really fascinating to see that I loved your phrase, giving the gold plan to the gold digger, because I think you're doing it. That's a very San Francisco 49ers type thing to say, and yet you're doing it outside of the traditional Silicon Valley runway. And even talking about what you're doing in Tel Aviv and what you're doing in Paris, and how Google in Europe is really investing in accelerating these programs that aren't necessarily following the traditional Silicon Valley path. And so I think that's really interesting and fascinating. And yeah, I think what I'd like to do is maybe just start a discussion about kind of in terms of your pathway, what it's, Heeks is in an interesting position in that you are growing quite a bit and scaling. And I think, it'd be interesting to hear from you, what opportunities and constraints you see in terms of scaling over the coming months and years. And particularly you're in this lane where, from a data platform standpoint, you can work with a number of companies, and you have an opportunity to accelerate companies that necessarily aren't like the big 2 or 3 OEM or tech companies. And so what do you see as the opportunities in the immediate, and not too distant future from a scaling standpoint?
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks for that point, because actually there is a huge opportunity for scaling. We have been talking a lot about big data over the last few years, data being the new oil, but especially for AI-driven industries, big data is not necessarily the answer. Nevertheless, there is more and more data. So the concept of like thinking about the relevant, the pertinent data that you need for your activities, whether you are like an R&D, developer, whether you are like operation manager and you need like live information because there is a specific event that you want to monitor, whether you are an insurance company and you want to also like get the information about the autonomous driving car who just had an accident. All the use cases that are possible thanks to this smart data approach are huge. And the more data there will be, and there is more and more data coming, the bigger our opportunity will become in order to scale. I also mentioned in the presentation, there is a strong need to accelerate the time to market. Billions of investment made in different industries. Our solution aims to really accelerate that time to market. So we don't want our customer to waste time in like dealing with data. We want our customer to basically focus on their core expertise, whether it's a perception software system, whether it's like providing the entire autonomous driving experience. We just want to be that middleman to provide the right data to the right user super efficiently. Talk about the market consolidation too. Market consolidation comes with like more complex organization. So there will be definitely a need to streamline the workflow and to really have better data management processes. A lot of industries also are working on, with AI, as I mentioned, not only autonomous driving, agricultural scale. So it's opened the door for us into a lot of application. At the end of the day, our goal is really to introduce a new industry standard with smart data, which we believe will become the basis for data management approach for development and operation activities.
That's, I think that's fascinating. And also just like this idea of a platform approach that increases competition and increases the number of companies that have the capacity and the number of entities that have the capacity to pursue automation. And I think that we titled today kind of how can we accelerate the pathway to automation. And I think some of that is predicated on this idea of decreased collisions and kind of this idea of the promise of automation. And we know from research and from speculation that there's both promise and peril. And over the last few years, we've talked about this idea of the yin and the yang, or the pros and the cons of automation. But I think this is interesting because what you're saying is let's show up the how can we accelerate the positive? And so if we were to kind of go along that line, what do you think that could, what are the things that you think could accelerate your pathway as a company, but also accelerate this pathway to, higher levels of automation, level 4, level 5, that could help us achieve some of the promise of, particularly of reduced collisions, more throughput, and hopefully we don't have to deal with a lot of the social ills that a lot of academics have talked about. But like, if we were assuming that there is that things are going to be positive, what could help us accelerate that pathway to automation and the promise of automation?
Yeah, so I mean, for the industry as a whole, automation promise is basically, to bring a safer mode of transportation, to bring convenience and affordability. So these are still the goals. I think people understand them, but until you basically expand them, it's very difficult to basically just like support that vision, right? And again, as mentioned before, the fact that we don't have a level of autonomy that allows for market and commercial deployment is still like a barrier for this acceleration, which will then become exponential once the first application will be there. Some countries like Germany, they are changing their regulation, on autonomous driving to accelerate the test and the deployment. I think also the industry is understanding that it's not only the sole scenarios of calling or robot taxi to your door and then going to another location, and then you don't have a driver. There are different market application of autonomous driving, such as the trucking industries, the hub to hub, deliveries. That will accelerate, I think, automation in the future, because it will bring them into a much more controllable environment, which might not require L5. Because at the end of the day, I think for the discussion that are now, or the trend that are now slowing down automation, on the other hand, is this whole conversation now happening regarding, the whether we're going to be able to reach L5 ever, right? Because now that we basically are facing the end of the curve that I showed before, the long tail where you basically have to collect all these new scenarios and edge cases. We just basically realize, well, we might never be able to, have a fully automated vehicle that can drive anywhere, everywhere,
in every condition.
And that is the discussion that is happening now. And I think a lot of companies are now, focusing on maybe L2, L3, L4 to some extent, which still required a lot of data. But I guess the promises of having like a car driving anywhere and with the highest level of safety is still not for tomorrow.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting too, because I think the L4, the SAE standards, the kind of this L4, L5 discussion hijacks the conversation sometimes, and so we assume that it's L5. I'll be in the vernacular. It's L5 or bust. So fully automated, and to be honest, the OEMs save a lot of lives by even introducing level 3 technology into vehicles. And there's some advancements that can be gained from those types of automation. But I think one of the things that you and I had discussed before this call was that just from a company standpoint, some of the things that help you, so from a regulatory standard, from a governance standard, are the things that cities can do to help get autonomous systems out on the road?
Yeah, I think there are, like today, there is still like inconsistency across cities, states, countries about dealing with regulation and standard on autonomous driving. I think our solution has a potential to help cities identify new metrics to monitor the performance of autonomous vehicle. Today, the key indicator is disengagement. So disengagement, again, is like when the driver has to take over the steering wheel because the car is not able to perform the operation automatically. But the problem is that this disengagement criteria is becoming a little bit controversial. Some companies are kind of like not providing the full disengagement reports because they say like, well, the driver took over the wheel deliberately, so it was not like an operation that the car could not operate. So it basically lack of transparency and standardization in the way we monitor the performance of autonomous vehicle. And with our smart data approach, it would be much easier to have like a standard on how we automatically report some kind of metrics to monitor that performance. So that's one first point. Another one is obviously we talked about like the difference across all the different cities. I said before, like how driving in Paris is different from driving in San Francisco. Even the layout of the street is completely different. And for whoever drove in Paris around the Arc de Triomphe, it's one of the most critical intersections in the world to drive through. But without going to that extent of like changing the rules, I think there are potential to create synergies, across all the different cities for some kind of like, basic rules of driving to standardize the adoption of autonomous driving. And it doesn't have to be on the entire city, it doesn't have to be on like every zone, but there is a way to potentially standardize a little bit better the adoption of autonomous driving across jurisdiction. The thing is that standardization will become an asset, but referring to the discussion we had before, it could also be an obstacle to achieving full L5 benefit, because then you will create less diversity, and then, well, L5 will become even more difficult to reach and eventually.
Yeah, I mean, so this is interesting. I mean, I think when we talk about the regulatory barriers, I love that you emphasize the jurisdictional boundaries, and I wonder if, do you feel like the European Commission, EU, is doing more to standardize than states in the US? Are there things that the US can learn from Europe with regard to kind of this idea of kind of standardization across jurisdiction or across countries?
Well, I hope so. I mean, like in Europe, we especially if we talk about Paris, there is a lot of, let's say, policies, London, about like car-free zone and removing combustion engine from the cities, promoting alternative mode of transportation with bikes, with pedestrian. I mean, like driving in Paris, it's not only complicated because of other vehicles now, but it's also becoming complicated because of bikes and e-scooter.
Yeah.
So there is a strong willingness of Europe to, change the way transportation occurs in the cities, also with the goal of like making these cities more, economical and sustainable. So I hope there is also some, sharing and learning, and with the new, let's say, administration in the US, I'm pretty sure there will be more openness to think through those lines. But yeah, at the end of the day, it's still very I mean, France is a central country, so it's either also politically to take a decision in Paris and then to carry that over across the country. When you have a states country like the US, it's a little bit more challenging.
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking with my friend Tom, who lives in Utrecht and commutes via train to Brussels, and we don't necessarily have that luxury in the U.S. But with the pandemic, has been very interesting in that many people have speculated that this is the death of the city in the U.S. And to cite, I'm glad you brought up this idea of the 15-minute city, the importance of cities and car-free areas. And I think it's a really important area. And if we were to position that in terms of like in the vernacular for our US audience, is that Mark Twain said, rumors of my death have been highly exaggerated. Well, we can say rumors of the death of the city have been highly exaggerated. So hopefully, we actually can really embrace that in the U.S. in terms of the idea of the importance of downtowns, the importance of car-free cities, and I think that a lot of what we talked about with this autonomous vehicles in the city initiative and conference relates to that. But the pandemic has really changed the way we think about cities and the way we think about how we engage with transportation and particularly with transit. I think there's a lot of questions about the future of transit right now, and I'm wondering, if the last year and a half have changed the way you think about HEEX's business model at all, and if you think there are any use cases that have emerged that are opportunities for you, or if there are any constraints that you've seen in terms of how you might pivot in the future.
Yeah, so I mean, like we are a software company, and we offer software services that can be integrated and delivered remotely. So it makes it much easier for us to develop and sell our product. So as far as like the business model is concerned, we somehow are already almost fully digitized, and we are equipped to address the challenges of the pandemic. Now, thinking about like new use case, automation is also another leverage that the industry can take to reduce touch point, for example, reduce human contact in pandemic crisis. When I was at Bosch, they were actually developing this automated valet parking where a car within a specific environment can basically go and park itself, so that reduce, a lot of, contact rather than using the actual valet. So there are a lot of use cases where automation can maybe, overcome some of the challenges of, the pandemic that we observed. Again, the market trend has been to increase a lot of, food delivery, logistic, with, Amazon making great revenue numbers because everybody is like ordering now from home. Again, there is also another huge potential here with robotic deliveries, for example, or as I said, the hub autonomous truck, to reduce the cost and the time of like moving goods across the country. So I think the pandemic will also have an impact. I mean, already had an impact on how we are consuming things, and automation will basically become also an enabler to address these challenges.
Yeah, it's also interesting in that you brought up parking, and I'm thinking of Don Shoup, our he's the Don of parking here on the West Coast at UCLA, and a lot of people have assumed that parking is just going away. And so I think what you brought up was this, like, this is not, this may not be an immediate change. It may not be as black and white. It may not be binary as we tend to make it. That's really interesting. I have Eric, who has a lot of questions about insurance and liability. I think it's a little out of Pierre and I's wheelhouse, and we can connect you, Eric, online. We can connect you. We have some folks at Marsh Insurance that are very keen to this, that we've talked to. I think last year we had a great conversation with Rob Bauer from Marsh. We can connect you to him, but I think Pierre has a little bit of experience with this idea of the trolley problem. You can probably answer that, yeah. Pierre.
Yeah. I saw Eric's question. I wanted to address partly to that answer, because I'm not an insurance company myself, and I definitely can't take the liability of my answer, so to say. But
yeah, well, so we should state the question. So Eric's very curious about liability with regard to this concept of the trolley problem. So what happens algorithmically when the AI or the vehicle, robotically, we have to make a decision between different collision pathways, whether or not it's a pedestrian or another vehicle, et cetera. These are super corner cases, so I want to put that out there from an academic standpoint. These are edge cases that programmers have to deal with, and this is something Pierre and I wanted to talk about in terms of.
No, but I can talk.
Go ahead, Pierre.
But I can talk about like how insurance company can address that in the future. Yeah. And again, our smart data approach could be a great solution, because if you think about like a car without a driver, then you have an accident, who is going to be basically getting out of the car and starting the paperwork to basically start the process of analyzing, liability. And the thing is that now, and there are more and more regulation going in this direction, where you need to record, monitor what has happened in the vehicle before the crash, before the collision. So with our solution, you could very elegantly monitor all the vehicle condition and data and video stream or whatever is available to not only record that for future analysis, but you could also send that directly over the air to an insurance company that can start what they will qualify as early claim management and look into the process. So our data management solution will not, tell you who is liable, but it will provide you the tools to work on it and analyze it as best as you can. And I know it doesn't answer the entire question, but just wanted to basically link that, let's say, challenges that pose autonomous driving and how smart data or more, intelligent data management approach can help address that specific issues.
Yeah, well, one thing we talked about too, Pierre, and I want to jump to this. It's a little out of sequence, I think, but one thing we talked about before was this approach to diversity that you have at HEEX. And we should applaud you and Bruno and the rest of the leadership team in and I think it's of consequence that Google has basically funded you through the Black Founders Fund. And so so I mean, I think one thing we talked about before this call was this idea of even integrating diversity into the algorithmic approach to identifying features on the road. And so, maybe we could talk about, what makes HEEX distinctive from a social equity standpoint, even down to the AI and AI bias.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, obviously, with this Black Founders Fund Award, it also put a lot of exposure on us, and to Bruno, and this is great. I believe, it also fits our company values in terms of diversity. We want to embrace it. We actually should have mentioned that I lived in San Francisco for 5 years, but both Bruno, Etienne, and Arnaud also lived in San Francisco at a point in their life, whether they were student or professor for Arnaud. And we have that also kind of like mentality of diversity, and having a common language to talk about different experiences. So that's something that we want to carry along with us in our company journey. We believe that there is, obviously, it's a fact, an underrepresented population in this tech industry, and the fact that Google, through this program, was a distinguishing company that have more diversity in their funding team is actually something that we really appreciate. We do appreciate that, not only because it supports our company, but because I think it's a path forward. It's a way forward to also address the issue of the bias that you have with AI. I mean, without being in the caricature of saying that you only train your pedestrian recognition on white people, which obviously is not the case, but there are definitely bias in training your model, in training your machine learning system with human, and having more diversity in the tech industry will obviously improve that situation. So we are very happy that we are part of that move to have more diversity and inclusivity in the AI field.
Yeah, this is great, and we have a distinguished professor at USF that's really interested, Richard Gergie Johnson III, who's really interested in this topic, and he was very grateful for us taking this on, and he's looking at everything from how AI can proliferate down the can actually address some of these social justice issues, but also how we can proliferate like electric vehicles and a lot of this technology to historically disadvantaged communities. So this is something we're going to revisit as an institution, as a research organization, a number of times over the next couple years. So thank you for that, Pierre. Dave Rubin had a question for us, and maybe we can just jump to that, about just kind of different approaches to, I'll just read his question, verbatim, about, do you have thoughts about, how policymakers should incorporate and weigh a fleet operator's decision to go all electric or versus operating gas-powered AVs, and particularly given how much power is drawn from ADAS and AV systems. And any thoughts about that?
Well, it's I'm not a policymaker, but I have my own ideas, so I can give you my personal thoughts. Before sharing them, I want to say that from a technological standpoint, it's much easier to develop an autonomous vehicle on electrical chassis and architecture than on a combustion engine. So it's obviously not a surprise that Tesla is very advanced in their autonomous system, because with their electrical architecture, and well, they do everything from end to end. So they have all this software that they can include and so on. So ultimately, the point I want to say that automation will also become a driver of electrification, from a technological standpoint.
Interesting.
Now, from a policy standpoint, I mean, like, again, take the example of the city that I'm in now, in Paris. The mayor make a clear statement that by 2030, there won't be any combustion engine in the city anymore. That's whether it's AV or not. So I think it comes down to political decision, come down to us, as with our right to vote, to also make our voice heard. But definitely, ultimately, from a technological standpoint, it makes more sense. Also, the maintenance and the cost of having a electrical, AV, all the, for example, like shuttles and robotaxi and so on, they are built based on like electrical cars. So that will come, I believe, a bit more like organically, and I hope the policymakers will also kind of like follow that trend.
Well, it's funny, coming up on the 4th of July and Bastille Day, we have this opportunity to really think about how democracy and this idea of voting, but also voting with your dollar, and how we actually support electrification, and how even as consumers, we actually support this pivot to not only electrification, but as you're saying, this synchronistic parallel between electrification and automation. And I've actually never heard it said as clearly as you that these things are synergistic or synchronistic, however you want to do that. And that's actually really interesting to say from a, and is that from a drivetrain standpoint? I mean, you have a very OEM, is that just from a mechanical standpoint that it functions better? Or, how did, I'm not a car guy to start off with, although I love cars. So I'd like to understand that a little more just from a high.
I'm not a car guy either, in a way. Like, I've never built a car myself, but I would say, like, if you take an electrical car, you have like much less components already at first. If you don't have a combustion engine, there are so many components that you can remove. So the architecture of an electric car it's simplified. And the nature of the electrical make it also much easier to integrate additional software services and computing power that are needed for automation. So at the end of the day, when it comes about like components and their integration, and having a chassis that can be then replicated for different kind of, let's say, vehicle, that makes it much easier to build and then to maintain and to operate.
Yeah, my mind keeps jumping. I had a conversation with Robert Cervero a couple months ago about his Kiewit that he had, and so Kiewit was an electric, one of the first lead acid electric car makers, and he had this small car at that point. But even at that point, it's exactly what you were describing. And of course, when if you've watched the movie the Who Killed the Electric Car, we were seeing this idea of smaller, less components in electric vehicles. We've been seeing that for a long time. So actually that resonates with me, and I appreciate you jumping to that. Maybe, as we kind of bring our session to a close, I would love to kind of blow this out to the notion of cities and how, so, I mean, we talk a lot and we've assumed that like there are a lot of benefits from automation, but, if we were to think beyond the vehicle, what are applications in terms of smart cities and how we make our communities more vibrant? If we're to think about from a city planning standpoint, what are the potential opportunities we should start thinking about?
Yeah, sure. So obviously, there is the intelligence of the vehicle, especially if you're on an L5 level, the vehicle needs to be driving everywhere, anywhere. The thing is that you can also, put some of this intelligence in your infrastructure. And that's what some cities are doing with, for example, ITS application, intelligent traffic systems. And now you having this intelligence in the infrastructure also enable new cases for cities. So there are, for example, cities that have LiDAR technology, which normally would be used for vehicle, and cameras at the traffic intersection. And these sensors, these very intelligent sensors, are now used to identify and potentially anticipate events and potential accidents. So again, with the smart data approach, you could think about like monitoring all the different sensors and conditions of an intersection, and then alert when there is a collision, where there is an accident, so that the different police, ER, all the different city departments are informed and then can act, reactively to that event. But the thing is that with AI, you can also bring all these different events and data that are being used, and then analyze them a little bit further, and maybe identify patterns or systemic failures under which these accidents are taking place. So with that intelligence, you can maybe proactively anticipate that there is a higher risk of collision because, I don't know, a street is closed and it's raining, and you know that there will be a huge traffic with like a potential higher hazard. You could also work about your urban planning, because this intersection is actually much more dangerous because of this condition, or because there is a new construction area next to the intersection. So there are many ways of, let's say, leveraging the intelligence that you can put in the infrastructure, the data that you will generate from in a live monitoring perspective, but also in a more like a long-term, short-term urban planning perspective.
Yeah, and Pierre, when in our first autonomous vehicles in the city conference, you came and talked a little bit about that. And I think what I'm hearing now too is a more crystallized approach to the opportunity that data science presents to kind of optimizing the city. And interestingly, I think we're having a more software-based approach now than, and it was a lot of the discussion, for the last 3-4 years has been on hardware. And I think what you're suggesting is a lot of this data is there. We have to figure out how to use it and how to optimize it. And that's really, really an important nugget for us to take, I think, to take forward. And Shawa from our faculty, is asking like how far we are from this smart city that you're referring to. And I think, my thought, Pierre, I'd be interested in your opinion, is I don't think we're that far. I don't think we need a ton of hardware, but because I think a lot of the data actually exists, but I think a lot of the backbone, and this is really interestingly, this is where HEEX resides, is a lot of this data backbone and a lot of the ability for particularly for civic agencies to harness this, and for kind of people interested in urban analytics, that we haven't started to tap into that data yet. I don't know what your thoughts are on this, Pierre.
Yeah, no, I think, first of all, I think it would require maybe another like coffee talk, or maybe a wine dinner to basically answer that question. But to make it short, every cities will see themselves smart but with a completely different definition. For some cities, having a smart lighting that will adjust depending on the lighting about the pedestrian or the traffic will be making them a smart city. Some cities will just want to monitor their air quality, like in China, if you can do that. Some cities will have like a big, traffic issue. So the main message is that every city is different, and every city can have many ways of becoming smart. Now, there are, I think, more and more understanding about how devices that are producing data that then are producing application can benefit from all the different cities and citizens. So we are on the way there. I think the struggle there is to find the right business model, because smart lighting is easy to implement because you basically generate enough savings to finance the new technology. But traffic is a much more complicated, let's say, financial model, because you have to put investment, and then the let's say the return on investment will be made based on the job that you will generate, by the people that you will attract. And the short cycle of the political cities is making it difficult sometimes to make an investment decision that will only have a return on investment in like 5-10 years from now. So it's a difficult question. It's not a perfect answer, but the idea is that I think there is a big awareness of like the leverage of digitalization, data, IoT, Internet of Things, to make your city smarter. And there are a lot of cities making progress in that. But well, there is still some way to go before we have like this perfect smart city.
Yeah,
unless you build it from scratch.
Yeah, and I think this is one of those things where we have in the U.S. there's been a lot of policy initiatives in kind of investing in huge infrastructure projects to generate data. And I think what's interesting, if you step back from that, and this is me looking at it from a research standpoint, is there are a lot of data sources that we don't take advantage of and so when we think about, like, for example, our highway traffic cams and the idea that we could do image classification on many of those and classify vehicles based on fuel type, just based on the shape of the vehicle. So there are some potential opportunities, I believe, that we can still harness. So, I think we are coming up at time, and maybe one of the last things that I wanted to just focus in on, we have a lot of people that are practitioners, a lot of academics on the line, but we also have a ton of students that attend our events. And particularly where you are, Pierre, I think it's a learning opportunity for us to understand someone that's been in multiple industries and lessons that you might tell to young people that might want to enter this space, might be interested in HEECS, might be interested in comparable companies or OEMs. I mean, what would you have to say to young folks, advice that want to enter the AV space, the transportation planning space, the smart cities space? Would you have, maybe some thoughts for them as we wrap up?
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, I think, it's a very exciting market. It's in continuous development. The technology is great. I think it's also has like a purpose. Ultimately, you need to think about why you are doing something. I mean, ultimately, autonomous driving, beside the business aspect of it, the goal is to really provide a safer, a more convenient, and a more affordable transportation mode. So I think you need to think about that too. I mean, I personally think about that too. As far as X technologies is concerned, we are located in Paris, or let's say we are headquartered in Paris, but we are an international companies. I mean, we are talking, I mean, as I said, there are people now in Israel. They are going to be in the Bay Area in a few weeks. We have customers in Germany, in the US, everywhere. So, if you are eager to learn, to develop new skills in an international environment, we are actually recruiting new talents in different areas, in development, operation, sales. So, I mean, if you are interested to be part of the adventure, we'll be happy to have a separate conversation together.
Yeah, well, that's great. And so, if folks are interested in getting connected with Pierre, happy to provide that conduit. Just pop me an email at my University of San Francisco email. That's WRIGGS@usfca.edu. And I think with that, we'll wrap up for the day. We actually, Pierre, this has been just a great way, conversationally, to be introduced and to introduce folks to HEECS and to what you are doing kind of outside of the Silicon Valley mainstream, but also I think what companies are doing to accelerate automation in general. And I think so this is a really interesting space. And I think it grows the conversation we've been having for the last few years on automation in cities in a really positive way. So I really appreciate you being here today, Pierre, to have this discussion. And we're going to have a hopefully in-person conference in November that maybe we can get you to come over for. We're having our next actual conference in downtown San Francisco on November 5th. So I'd invite everybody on the call to attend there. And Pierre, maybe we'll be able to connect in person. So.
Yeah, it would be great. Thanks again for the invitation. I really enjoyed that conversation, and it's always a pleasure. Even if physically I was not part, it was a pleasure to basically feel the San Francisco vibe around that, around that call, and hopefully I can be physically there for the next conference in November. So, thank you again, Billy. Thank you to the University of San Francisco School of Management, and thank you for all the participants that attended. That hopefully you learned something today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Pierre. Well, and thank you everybody who attended.